Arsène Lupin vs. Herlock Sholmes, Episode 4, Lupin's Perfect Counterattack. Welcome back, Detective. After the emotional intensity of Clotilde's tragedy, both Lupin and Sholmes have evolved. The detective learned compassion, the thief confirmed his honor. But now the game resumes with new stakes. Today, Lupin launches his most audacious counterattack yet, exploiting the very humanity Sholmes discovered. Can a detective's newfound compassion become his greatest vulnerability? Prepare for the ultimate test of disguise versus deduction. Picture this: June 1908. Paris. Herlock Sholmes receives an unusual invitation to lecture at the Sorbonne on the science of criminal detection. The university's criminology department wants him to present his methods to students and professors. It's a tremendous honor and, more importantly, an opportunity to publicly demonstrate superiority over French detective methods, including explaining his near capture of Arsène Lupin. Sholmes accepts enthusiastically, seeing this as a chance to restore his reputation after the mixed results of previous encounters. I'll systematically present how deductive reasoning can predict criminal behavior, he tells Dr. Wilson. I'll use Lupin as my primary case study, showing how his methods, while clever, are ultimately analyzable and therefore defeatable. But here's what Sholmes doesn't know. The invitation itself is a forgery. The real criminology department never contacted him. The entire lecture is Lupin's creation, designed to draw Sholmes into a controlled environment where he'll be surrounded by people Lupin has carefully positioned. Think about the audacity. My apprentice turning a university lecture into a stage for theft, with the victim as the main speaker. The lecture hall fills with 200 attendees on June 15th. Students, professors, journalists, police officials, all eager to hear the famous British detective explain his methods. Among them are several people we should note carefully. A young professor of psychology named Devon Anne, an elderly linguistics scholar called Massaban, a beautiful literature instructor named Madame Riel, and a quiet librarian named Bresson, who sits in the back taking meticulous notes. Sholmes begins his lecture with characteristic confidence. Criminal detection is fundamentally about pattern recognition and logical deduction. Every criminal, no matter how clever, operates within consistent psychological parameters that, once identified, make their behavior predictable. He uses Lupin as his example, describing their encounters in detail, explaining how he's gradually building a comprehensive profile. Notice something crucial here. Detective Sholmes is publicly revealing his analytical methods, his deductive frameworks, his understanding of Lupin's psychology. He's essentially teaching Lupin exactly how he thinks and works. What criminal mastermind wouldn't want such intelligence delivered as a comprehensive lecture? During the question period, several attendees ask penetrating questions that push Sholmes to elaborate on specific techniques. Professor Devan asks about disguise detection. How do you identify false identities in social settings? Sholmes explains his methods for spotting makeup, analyzing body language, detecting voice strain. Madame Real inquires about predicting target selection. How do you anticipate what a thief will steal next? Sholmes describes his victim pattern analysis in detail. Think carefully about these questions. My apprentice. They seem academically curious, but they're actually probing for specific intelligence about Sholmes's detective methods. What better way to understand your opponent than to have him explain his tactics in a formal lecture? After 2 hours, Sholmes concludes triumphantly, and so, through systematic application of deductive reasoning, any criminal can eventually be understood and captured. Arsène Lupin's current freedom is temporary. I'm assembling a complete psychological profile that will predict his next moves with certainty. The audience applauds enthusiastically. But during the reception afterward, something extraordinary occurs. Inspector Ganimard, who attended the lecture, approaches Sholmes urgently. We need to speak privately. It concerns Arsène Lupin. They retreat to a private office where Ganimard reveals shocking news. Lupin was in that lecture hall. We had an informant watching, and they confirmed seeing someone matching Lupin's known associates entering the building. Sholmes's face goes pale. Then he heard everything. Every method, every technique, every aspect of my analytical approach. He now knows exactly how I think. But Ganimard's concern goes deeper. There's more. The Duke of Charmerace's Egyptian scarab collection, worth 2 million francs, is on display at the Louvre this week. Based on your own pattern analysis, this matches Lupin's preferred targets perfectly. He's going to strike, and now he knows exactly how you'll try to stop him. Think about Sholmes's dilemma now, detective. His own lecture has become an intelligence briefing for his opponent. Every defensive strategy he might employ, Lupin can now anticipate because Sholmes explained his thinking process in detail. How do you catch someone who knows everything about how you catch people? But here's where it gets truly brilliant. Sholmes, rather than despair, sees an opportunity. If Lupin attended my lecture, then he revealed himself by being there. One of those attendees was him in disguise. If I can identify which one, I can turn his intelligence gathering into a trap. He obtains the attendance list and begins analyzing every person who was present. This is classic Sholmes, turning disadvantage into advantage through pure analytical skill. But he's facing Lupin's greatest talent, the perfect disguise. Let me describe the 4 suspects Sholmes identifies as most likely. Professor Devan, psychology expert, asked detailed questions about criminal motivation. His credentials are real, his university position verified, but something about his questions seemed too practically focused for academic curiosity. Masaban, the elderly linguist, barely spoke but watched Sholmes with intense concentration throughout. His age makes him seem unlikely. But we've seen Lupin use elderly disguises before. His credentials are also legitimate, but could be stolen identity. Madame Real, beautiful literature instructor whose questions about target prediction were remarkably sophisticated. Women are rarely suspected, which makes female disguise strategically brilliant. Her position at the Sorbonne is confirmed, but that could be deep cover established months ago. Bresson, the quiet librarian taking notes, almost invisible in his ordinariness, which is exactly what would make him perfect cover. His employment records are genuine, but libraries provide access to information useful for planning crimes. Now comes the detective's challenge, my apprentice. For suspects, all with verified credentials and legitimate positions. One is Lupin, but how do you identify a master of disguise when he's had months or years to establish a false identity so deep it becomes real? Sholmes employs every technique he knows. He analyzes handwriting samples from their academic papers. He checks employment histories for gaps or inconsistencies. He interviews colleagues about their behavior patterns. He even examines photographs from years ago to verify their identities have remained consistent. The work is exhaustive, brilliant, meticulous. And here's what he discovers. All four are exactly who they claim to be. Every credential is genuine, every employment history consistent, every personal detail verified. Sholmes is baffled. One of them must be Lupin, but I cannot find a single inconsistency in any of their identities. How is this possible? The answer, when it comes 3 days later, is devastating. The Duke of Charmerace's scarab collection is indeed stolen from the Louvre, but not by anyone who attended the lecture. Lupin sends Sholmes a letter explaining the brilliant misdirection. Dear Herlock, thank you for the excellent lecture on your detective methods. However, I wasn't actually present. Those 4 suspects you've been investigating. All genuine academics I knew you'd focus on, wasting your time while I prepared the real heist. Think about the layers of deception here. Detective Lupin created a false trail, suggesting he attended the lecture, knowing Sholmes would exhaust himself investigating phantom suspects. Meanwhile, the real Lupin was elsewhere, planning the actual theft. But the truly brilliant part, Lupin did send someone to the lecture, just not himself. The letter continues. The person who attended on my behalf was my associate, trained to ask questions that would extract maximum intelligence about your methods. You were right that someone gathered information from your lecture. You were just wrong about who. The forgery wasn't my attendance, but your assumption that I would personally attend something so obviously dangerous. You underestimated my caution while overestimating your analytical certainty. But Sholmes isn't finished. He reviews everything again and discovers something Lupin overlooked. The lecture was photographed by a journalism student for the university newspaper. In one photo, barely visible in the background, is a 5th person not on the official attendance list, a janitor cleaning windows during the lecture, positioned perfectly to hear everything while appearing completely invisible. The janitor's employment records show he was hired 3 months ago, replacing another janitor who retired suddenly with a generous pension he couldn't explain. The new janitor's references are impeccable, but when Sholmes traces them back, they're all from people who've been subtly bribed or convinced to vouch for someone they barely remember meeting. There he is, Sholmes breathes, staring at the photograph. Not a professor or student, but the most invisible person in the room, working-class staff whom academics barely notice. The perfect disguise isn't elaborate makeup and false credentials. It's social invisibility. We looked right past him because we assumed Arsène Lupin would disguise himself as someone important, not someone beneath notice. This revelation transforms Sholmes's understanding of disguise. Lupin's genius isn't just creating false identities, it's choosing identities that exploit the observer's blind spots. Academics don't notice janitors, the wealthy don't see servants, the powerful overlook the powerless. Social prejudice creates invisibility more effective than any mask. But by the time Sholmes makes this deduction, Lupin has disappeared completely. The janitor position was abandoned the day after the lecture, and tracking him proves impossible. The scarab collection is never recovered. Though individual pieces surface in private collections across Europe over the following months. However, Sholmes does achieve one victory. In studying the janitor's employment records, he discovers a pattern in how Lupin establishes deep cover identities, using genuine but economically desperate people as unwitting character witnesses, creating paper trails through small bribes rather than elaborate forgeries. It's not enough to catch Lupin now, but it's intelligence that might prove useful later. The letters resume. Lupin writes, "Dear Herlock, your lecture was genuinely educational. I learned much about your methods, particularly that they're brilliant, but rely on assumptions about what criminals consider valuable disguises. You look for elaborate deception when simple invisibility often works better. The game continues to teach us both." Sholmes responds, "Monsieur Lupin, you've taught me that my greatest weakness is intellectual pride, assuming I'm always the smartest person in the room. A janitor isn't beneath my notice because he's intellectually inferior, but because social prejudice made him invisible. You exploited not my deductive failures, but my human biases. That's a different order of opponent than I anticipated. Well played. So tell me, detective, who won this encounter?" Lupin got his scarabs and gained intelligence about Sholmes's methods. But Sholmes learned a profound lesson about the limits of pure reason when facing an opponent who understands human psychology better than any textbook. Both emerged stronger, wiser, more dangerous to each other. This case reveals the evolution of their rivalry. Sholmes is no longer just applying logic to catch a criminal. He's learning to think like Lupin, to see through social structures rather than just analyzing evidence. And Lupin is learning that Sholmes adapts, that each defeat teaches him something new, that eventually this detective might actually develop defenses against even Lupin's most brilliant tricks. Inspector Ganimard watches their escalating sophistication with weary resignation. You're both becoming more like each other. Sholmes is learning creative thinking. Lupin is learning systematic analysis. Eventually, you'll be indistinguishable. A detective who thinks like a criminal and a criminal who thinks like a detective. I'm not sure whether that makes you more likely to catch each other or less. The newspapers continue breathless coverage. The duel intensifies. British detective outwitted by janitor disguise. But the real story is subtler. Two geniuses locked in a learning spiral, each encounter making both more formidable. The question isn't who's winning, but whether either can win when both keep evolving. Join me next time for Sholmes' Counterattack, where the detective, inspired by Lupin's lesson about invisibility, designs a trap using social blind spots against the gentleman thief himself. When both men understand each other's methods, the battle becomes about who can adapt faster to the other's adaptations. It's genius warfare at its most sophisticated.